I know that both of you also work a lot on using blockchain to help deliver electricity to the developing world and to help fund projects, sustainable energy projects in the developing world, particularly sub-Saharan Africa. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about the work that you're doing on the developing world and how you think blockchain might actually help deliver energy and perhaps financial resources to build energy or to create energy in the developing world, particularly sub-Saharan Africa, if you like, or other parts of the developing world.
Well, while I gather my thoughts, I don't know if you can just say something.
Yeah, I mean, this question is for both of you. So, I mean,
Okay.
if either of you have any thoughts about that, I'd be very interested in hearing them.
So, look, essentially, like I said, there's been this trajectory. Myself and Kunle worked together about 3 years at this point, maybe a bit less. Like I say, starting with these fairly narrow pieces around, hedging, and kind of inspired, we're working here in UCD in Ireland, inspired by the operation of the Irish electricity market that I'm most familiar with, and kind of gradually building out to say, okay, is this a case of I'm just financially hedging my risk exposure? How does that become like I'm pre-selling energy? How does that become I'm pre-selling ownership? So all the things kind of come together in this nexus, right? That, it's financing and it's forward selling and it's hedging. It's all sort of the same thing. And you suddenly go, okay, well, when you're writing a smart contract, like what I said earlier, what is the appropriate metaphor or label? I mean, a smart contract handles wealth according to algorithmic rules. So you set your rules and we can decide, is that ownership or financing or hedging? And maybe it's all three. And so it's kind of coming out of that mindset of saying, okay, maybe there's a financing piece to this. And often, you would hope the killer application for blockchain is in lower trust environments, or when for some institutional reason there's actually there's a hill that really should have solar cells on it. The hill is in the right place and the sun shines, and it is physically, in engineering terms, a good investment, a proper opportunity. But to say, well, is there an institutional, or is there a factor with banking or something that's going to stop people providing the funds to physically procure the hardware, do the capital works, and build that, get it connected to the grid? And so Olakunle kind of, we wrote that up, framing it, saying maybe those institutional barriers may be more acute in developing economies, where the banking system mightn't have as good access to capital. There could be issues with the legal system in terms of how fast moving it is. So I think that's kind of just, we were trying to make this point of saying financing and pre-selling and hedging, they can all be sort of packaged together into the same offering in terms of a smart contract. And maybe you can make a strong argument for that in countries that should have a lot of renewable energy, but sort of don't. And to say, is there an institutional gap there that we can plug? I mean, does that align with the way you view it, Olakunle?
Okay. So I'll speak from another angle also, just to also buttress your point. So for me, the project started as it's funded by the project's funded by the Irish government, and in a way, how I foresaw it at the start was developing blockchain financial instruments that would accelerate renewable electricity in mainly Ireland and say the rest of Europe. But as the project progressed, I saw like other opportunities, other like pressing problems that blockchains could address, particularly in the African electricity markets. So it's a bit personal for me because I've worked in the African power sector for about 3-4 years now, and in terms of default risk, which is I would say default or counterparty credit risk, which is the possibility of a party, which is, for instance, if you're a buyer, then the counterparty will be the seller, defaulting on like payment agreements. I think I've mixed that up a bit, but essentially, Africa has a low default risk compared to the rest of Europe, but it's still very hard for banks to finance African power projects because of why they say these projects have a high cost of capital. And this high cost of capital, in a way, mirrors default risk. So if a country has a high default risk, then it would in turn have a high cost of capital. But this, for me, didn't like make much sense. So I just went back and looked at how my research could address this. And one very important area was the aspect of decentralizing access to finance. So instead of having these big banks that could say, I mean, they are taking on all the credit risk when they finance projects in continents, why don't we open up finance to different potential investors with different abilities to invest in the project in terms of like the quantum of money they can contribute and their risk appetites? Why don't you just open it up and allow different people to be able to do their own, I won't say due diligence. First, we are decentralizing this risk instead of concentrating it to these few banks, which means that the cost of capital automatically becomes lower and the exposures become lower. So we are lowering the interest rate, which means the people that would eventually benefit from these fiscal connections would pay like low prices, and also the people that are invested in this project, they wouldn't have had access to such investment opportunities, but because of the distributed nature of blockchains, they can contribute into these projects. So essentially, we're just removing the powers from these big banks and giving it to the people, both from the demand side and the supply side. And we potentially believe that this would be beneficial for both the decentralized investors and the people that will be using the power that will be generated from these projects.